Okay. First of all, can everyone see the PowerPoint? Let me rephrase that. Can anybody not see the PowerPoint? Okay. That's a good sign, I think. You've already heard the intro as to who I am. I'm not going to go around the room and do a who are we. I like to do that when we do that in person, but I want to preface this by saying that I am not a practitioner, or better put, I'm not an initiate of any Afro-Diasporic religion. I'm not a member of any Hunfo or any Lucumí or Candomblé group, although I have a deep interest in them. Although the other point, I did take my Minerval in New Orleans with Sally Ann Glassman when she was running a lodge down there. We'll get to talk more about New Orleans Voodoo and other forms as part of the talk. I should also mention that a previous and much shorter version of this talk was presented at Noticon in 2013. Because this is intended for an audience that includes the public and people who have all different levels of familiarity, some of what I talk about will probably be familiar to some of you, but I wanted to make this information accessible to all and draw some connections between them. I also do other workshops. I'll show a list at the end. Please let me or let Scott know if you're interested in seeing any of them, or if you're interested in hosting any of them, let me know. If you want to put it on your own local body, Google Meet or Zoom or what have you. Please do feel free to ask questions and give feedback, but for the sake of bandwidth, please mute your mic when you're not speaking. And with that, away we go. Again, speak up if you can't see the presentation. And by the way, Google Meet does not play nicely with PowerPoint sometimes. In particular, there's going to be a film clip that I will show you. And as far as I know, you will not be able to hear it, so I will have to narrate it. So I apologize for that in advance. African-inspired religions have found expression in a startling number of ways in the Americas. From the slave trade-driven diaspora of the 16th through the 19th centuries, the migration of African peoples and culture during and since that period, and the revolutionizing of communication in the contemporary era, African forms of spirituality have intermingled with and sometimes co-opted Anglo-European and Native American religions in those areas of Creolization where these disparate cultures met, struggled, and fused. In the US, for example, a local derivation of Haitian Vodou, known as New Orleans Voodoo, has been dated to the late 18th century or earlier. In Brazil, some half a dozen or so partially overlapping forms of Afro-Brazilian religion have evolved. Similar processes of interaction have happened throughout the New World. This process of religious creolization, a term we will explain more clearly in a moment, continues even now, and a number of practices have arisen that combine African diasporic religious forms with Western esotericism. This process is not entirely new. Brazilian Umbanda, for example, has been heavily influenced by Kardecism, a variety of 19th century European spiritualism. What are new, however, are some of the hybrid expressions that have arisen in the late 20th century and into today. In the wake of the so-called occult explosion of the 60s and the New Age that followed, syncretic forms of spirituality appeared, blending African diasporic religions with Anglo-European magical systems like Taro, Kabbalah, and ceremonial magic rituals. Drawing upon primary and secondary sources in anthropology, Popular Culture and Religious Studies, this workshop explores some of the new and eclectic practices on the fringes of Afro-Diasporic religious expression. And two case studies will be examined in particular: the synthesis of Taro and Umbanda Orishas, or spirits, and the blending of Taro and Kabbalah with New Orleans Voodoo. I have chosen in this presentation to call the Loa or Orisha spirits for simplicity's sake, but I'm aware of the problematic nature of rendering the polyvalent Yoruban, Fon, and Congo words and their New World equivalents in such a simple term, but it'll have to do. At any rate, by examining these seemingly disparate systems and the ways that their constituent religious and magical elements have been combined, I hope that some new understanding will be gained in regard to the ways in which creolized religious practices arise in human cultures. So what do I mean by creolization? The term creolization is commonly understood to mean the process by which two or more cultures come together to create something new. In linguistics, creolized languages are often identified as using the syntax or grammar of the dominant culture's language with the lexicon or vocabulary of the colonized culture. As we shall see, in many ways, this describes the case studies examined here. One popular misconception, even among many practitioners, is that African-based forms of religious expression underwent an initial period of syncretism that ended with the abolishment of slavery. The perception seems to be that there was an especially active creolization in the first century or so following the arrival of slaves from Central and West Africa to the New World. For example, the well-known secretizing of African Loa and Orisha to various Catholic saints. But people seem to think that once slavery ended, so too did that creolization. In this view, the manifold forms into which Afro-diasporic religions had evolved became fixed, resisting any new synthesis with other forms of spirituality. If it isn't 19th century Vodou, it isn't real Vodou, is an attitude encountered even today among many practitioners. In fact, this syncretism, or better, creolization, continues to be an ongoing development. Vodou practitioners in Brooklyn devise ways to perform rituals without the traditional pouring of rum onto the floor. Haitian immigrants in Miami and white American practitioners of New Orleans Voodoo stage performances that incorporate elements not found in traditional Haitian rara, such as the use of Jamaican reggae rhythms, New Orleans second line dancing, and more. Brazil has been an especially active ground for ongoing creolization. Aspects of other forms of spirituality have been incorporated in a number of important ways, both during and since slavery, from romanticized notions of Lakota and Cheyenne practices to the adoption of New Age ideas about karma, reincarnation, even extraterrestrials, and even to the wholesale adoption of the work of Allan Kardec, whom we will discuss more shortly. For the bulk of people in the dominant cultures of the South, Central, and North America, however, African-derived forms of religion were, like most cultural expressions of the former slaves, considered to be either silly and childish or demonically inspired. Even today, the word voodoo is used to mean something inexplicable and either romanticized as magical or denigrated as mere superstition. Here comes the clip. The following pictures, taken at the risk of his life, were procured for curiosity by a member of the Marine Guard. The hideous voodoo ceremonies are held in secret at varied locations. The ceremony begins at sundown and continues all night, becoming wilder and wilder as the fanatical dancers work themselves into a religious frenzy. At midnight, the supreme sacrifice is made, during which a child of 3 or 4 years of age is killed and eaten. Children for the sacrifice are plentiful, as it is considered the greatest honor of voodooism to be chosen as the mother of a sacrificial victim to the serpent worship. There might be a few words in there that are correct, the or and. But by and large, most of this is, I think the technical term is bullshit. And yet this is the image that for many years, most people had of Vodou and other Afro-Diasporic forms of religion. Even today, history texts reduce Afro-Diasporic religion to simply saying that African forms of religious revelation were brought to the Americas by the slaves, and that they were able to survive by incorporating elements of Christian practice. And then they drop the subject. Excuse me. Except in the case of texts specifically focusing on African religions, found usually only in Black studies disciplines, they don't discuss these forms to any depth, nor the role of these religions in subverting the dominant culture. This is Babalú Aye. And this is the man who, for over a decade, beamed a praise song to Babalú into the unsuspecting homes of Mr. and Mrs. Muddle America. Some 12 million people were forcibly taken from Africa as slaves. Roughly 40% of them came from West Africa, Nigeria, Benin, the Ivory Coast, and another 40% from Central Africa, Angola, Congo, etc. Of these, more than 10%, some 2 million people, died on the Middle Passage, their bodies thrown into the dark waters of oblivion. Of the survivors, roughly 90% were sent to Brazil or the Caribbean. Less than 4% actually ended up in North America. And the forms of African-based religion that took root in the New World are derived from native religious practices of their homelands, which then changed in these new lands, mutating, combining with each other, and with native beliefs, and with the master's beliefs. To take but one example, since the earliest period of the Afro-Brazilian experience, religious practices of African slaves encountered and mixed with elements of European and Native American spirituality, giving rise to a wide variety of new religious forms. At one end of this scale, forms such as Kachimbo blend aspects of Afro-Diasporic religion with indigenous Brazilian tribal beliefs, including the use of tobacco and psychotropic substances such as jurema, which is a native tree. It's a type of acacia, actually, that is actually a variety of ayahuasca. The name Kachimbo may come from the word for a tobacco pipe, Kachimbo. Given the importance of tobacco to indigenous Amerindian cultures and religions, if true, this would provide another example of creolization. In Kachimbo, clients arrive with problems, and the mestre, or master, gives out advice, cures, charms, or medicines. The mestre is a shaman. He visits the other world, performs healings, and receives the spirits who are also themselves called mestres. And by the way, I apologize if any of you speak Brazilian Portuguese, because I do not, and I'm probably mangling these terms. The spirits may be humans, either ancestors or archetypes. They may be forest spirits or even dolphins. The dolphin spirits, an explicitly indigenous concept, are said to live in an enchanted city at the bottom of the Amazon River, to which they sometimes bring humans. They will also dress up, using magic to hide their true shapes, and attend human gatherings in order to seduce human women. And no, pink dolphin is not a sexual euphemism. They really are pink. At the other end of the scale are forms such as Macumba and Umbanda that give witness to a greater degree of influence from Central and West Africa and incorporate practices from those homelands, like polyrhythmic drumming, ecstatic dance, transpossession by the Orishas, who are spirits of African origin. As we will show in a moment, they have also added influences from Christianity as well as New Age concepts. Note that Macumba is here in quotes, because this is primarily a name pejoratively used by the press and other non-initiates for some of the rituals that they found, quote unquote, dark, whether meaning sorceress or dark as in more African, or most likely an equating of those two. The word Macumba is originally of Bantu origin, but has been applied to in Brazil to mean pretty much anything that's deemed black magic pun fully intended. Throughout the range of Afro-Brazilian religions, Creolization has given rise to a variety of new forms. To cite but one example, possession by African-derived Orishas is augmented in Brazil by the appearance of other spirits, including pretos velhos, or old slaves, crianças, or child spirits, and caboclos, or spirits of indigenous Brazilian Indians, in quotes, all of whom could only have come out of that diasporic experience and do not exist in traditional African forms. The incorporation of Cardicism into African Brazilian religion is especially pertinent here. Allan Kardec was the nom de plume, if you will, of Léon Denisard Hippolyte Rival, 1804 through 1869. He was the French author of several works on Spiritism, what we would now call spiritualism, including the Spirits book, which gained a huge following worldwide. His work was extremely popular in Latin America, especially Brazil, and had direct influence on such forms as Mexican curandismo and Brazilian espiritismo, Umbanda, and others. Kardec's work, by the way, also helped catalyze the mid and late 19th century fascination with spiritualism in Europe and the Americas, which in turn led to a growth of interest in occultism and medieval magical texts. Through this process of creolization, then, Afro-diasporic religions introduced concepts and practices from the European cultures that dominated them. The clearest example of the latter is the syncretizing of the Loa and Orisha with the iconography of Catholic saints. You will sometimes hear that people say that, well, the slaves camouflaged their religious practices from the masters by pretending that they were venerating Catholic saints. This has been disproven. Examples. As the opener of life's paths and the controller of the gate between the visible and the unseen worlds, Legba or Elegua is identified with St. Peter, holder of the keys to the pearly gates. Ezilidanto, a fierce protectress, is represented by pictures of the Black Madonna of Częstochowa, sorry, I don't speak Polish either, holding the infant Jesus. Ogum, the warrior blacksmith, is often invoked in the name of Saint Jacques, whose icons depict the saint wielding the sword of righteousness. So as you can see, this is a conscious choice to blend symbol sets that have congruent meanings. So too, Afro-Brazilian religion eagerly absorbed the organic cultural flow, as one writer puts it, of 19th century European spiritualist conceptions in the Spirits book and its sequels. Kardec may not have set out to become a direct influence upon Umbanda, but practitioners in Rio, Salvador, and elsewhere in Brazil enthusiastically introduced Cardicism into the religious ideas and practices, forever changing the face of Afro-diasporic religion there. Throughout the rest of the Americas, many other forms of Afro-diasporic religions evolved, from the Abacua of Cuba to the inclusion of Hoodoo in the U.S., a form of folk magic that is a mix of African, Native American, and Anglo folklore. Nor has this influence all been in one direction, as seen in the proliferation of ecstatic forms of religion since the introduction of African natives and the subsequent growth of Black churches, which in turn influenced the resurgence of ecstatic worship in the dominant mainstream religion. So let's look at two specific examples of the blending of the Western magical tradition and the African-derived spiritual practices in the Americas. And we'll begin with the Taro of the Orisha. The Taro of the Orishas comprises a bilingual book in English and Spanish and the attendant deck of 77 Taro cards, which it sets out to explain. Despite 19th century romantic notions of the Taro's alleged origins in ancient Egypt, aided by its connection in the popular imagination with equally romantic and equally erroneous ideas about the supposed Egyptian identity of the Gypsies, i.e. Romani people, with whom the name was associated, in fact, the earliest definitive date for the Taro is probably the first half of the 15th century. At the time called trionfi, or triumphs, the cards acquired the name tarocchi a century later, from which the current name of Taro was derived. There are earlier references to playing cards, usually in legal documents outlawing their use in gambling. And one of the earliest references to the word Taro, by the way, is in Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel, where it is called Tarao. A number of explanations have been offered for the name Taro. These most often draw upon similarities to words in Hebrew, Latin, Hellenicized Egypt, and frankly on pure fantasy. For example, the claim that it comes from Ta-ro, supposedly meaning royal road in ancient Egyptian. Sorry, there is no such phrase in any Egyptian language of any era. All of these explanations may be considered to be ex post facto. Although earlier examples show wide variety, by the late 19th century, the forms of the Taro deck had become more or less settled. We'll talk about variations in a moment. There's a set of 56 minor cards divided into 4 suits, usually associated with the 4 classical elements: wands, staves, batons, or clubs, corresponding to the present-day playing card suit of clubs, associated with fire and numbered from the ace through the 10. Cups, chalices, or goblets, hearts, associated with water. Swords, corresponding to the suit of spades from the Italian spada, which means sword, and associated with air. Coins, pentacles, or discs, diamonds, associated with earth. And a set of 16 court cards, similarly divided by suits, representing the king, queen, knight, and page of each suit. Note that some systems reverse the elemental attributions for wands and swords, and some divide the court cards differently, for example, knight, queen, prince, and princess. And then there is the set of 22, more or less, major cards, most often numbered from 0 through 21. In a number of decks, the first set, or minor arcana, are not fully illustrated, being represented merely by a number of items matching the suit, a drawing, for example, of 5 wands, or a painting of 7 cups. However, the second set, the major trumps or major arcana, greater mysteries, are almost always fully illustrated, even in decks where the minor arcana are not. There are wide variations in the names and attributions of the cards of the major arcana, but most include such figures as the sun, the moon, the magician, the lovers, the wheel of fortune, and so on. The popularity of fully illustrated tarot decks has led to a proliferation of literally hundreds of decks in print, from the intensely popular Rider-Waite deck to the Hello Kitty Tarot, the Hellraiser Tarot, and even a set designed by Salvador Dali. By the way, coming out later this year, there will be a Labyrinth Tarot based on the movie. So too, the wide latitude for variation has encouraged others to devise decks with major arcana featuring non-traditional figures. The Silicon Valley Tarot, for example, eschews the traditional figures in favor of the CEO, the hacker, the double latte, and so on. And one such variant deck is the Tarot of the Orishas. The designer, inspired by his work with Batuque, Umbanda, and Candomblé, has introduced a number of significant variations into this deck, including changing some of the major arcana to represent specific Orisha from African and Afro-Brazilian religion. Zolrak's deck includes 25 major trumps, for which he devises a set of attributions which are his alone. 5 of his cards are not attributed to the traditional deck, and there are 3 traditional cards that are not listed in his table. In addition, he has changed the members of the court cards from king, queen, and others to the elementals and messages. The inclusion of elemental spirits in the classical Western sense clearly indicates an influence from European occultism. Originally found in texts such as Agrippa and various medieval grimoires, these entities are not encountered in such a form in any kind of African religion from the sub-Saharan region from which Brazilian slaves were taken. And while it might not be unusual to find them in a Taro deck, there is a Taro of the fairies after all, their inclusion in the Taro of Orishas, along with cards such as Karma or the Guardian Angel, indicates the level of creolization that the author is promoting between Afro-Brazilian religions and Western occultism. There is, in fact, a strong possibility that Zolrak was influenced by ideas about elemental spirits from Kardec's work. His biographical note says that he studied and taught Kardecist spiritualism. Even more significant, however, are the ways in which African-derived spiritual entities are depicted. Each of the major trumps for an Orisha lists the spirit's name in English, Spanish, and Brazilian Portuguese with a full-color picture or image of the Orisha. The book gives a description for each in English and in Spanish, and a brief outline of the Orisha's background, and an interpretation or oracular reading for the card. Here's the one for the entry for Eshu. Quote, "Many think that Eshu is one of Elegwa's 21 archetypes. His dwelling is located at the crossing for 4 roads, which must each be open in the 4 directions for at least 7 blocks. He is the lord of the road, who carefully and cautiously listens and attends to our requests and brings them to the high Orisha, for whom he is the spokesman. Many syncretize him with Saint Michael, the archangels of the archangels, others with Saint Peter, the custodian of the keys of paradise, because Eshu has the keys to access the different psychic roads. His specialty is to open up pathways with regard to work, professional career, or means of living. He is seen here walking through a crossroads, smoking his typical cigar, which he, quote, smokes and de-smokes at the same time, while holding a bottle of his beverage in the right hand and in the other a trident. His beverage, by the way, would be a form of rotgut rum with peppers in it. In addition to the description and oracular interpretation for the cards, the author provides chapters on energizing the cards, methods for laying out the cards, including several of the reference motifs from popular New Age imagery, like a Giza pyramid layout and a 7th chakra layout, prayers to the elementals, description of Umbanda, an apologia titled Santería is not Voodoo. The book even includes a table associating the Hindu Kundalini chakras as filtered through Western New Age ideas, colors, notes of the Western musical scale, elements, and spiritual forces like the elementals and other entities like spiritual guides, along with the Orisha. Our next example is the New Orleans Voodoo Taro. Like the Taro of the Orishas, the New Orleans Voodoo Taro is a deck of original Taro cards and a companion book that describes and explains them. It is a collaboration between 2 artists who have a long-time association with New Orleans-style voodoo, Louis Martini and Sally Ann Glassman. Martini is a writer on a number of occult subjects and an editor for Black Moon Publishing, along with Michelin Linden, and is associated with the New Orleans Voodoo Spiritual Temple. Sally Ann Glassman is a longtime resident of New Orleans, a painter and illustrator for a number of books, including the Enochian Taro that she worked on with Jerry Schuller. She's an author in her own right and a Haitian-trained Vodou Mambo or priestess. She heads La Source Ancienne Umfo, a voodoo temple which has met weekly for the past 25 plus years, actually more like 27 by now. She's also been extremely active in post-Katrina efforts to revitalize the city, most recently with the New Orleans Healing Center. Voodoo has been in New Orleans since there have been African slaves there, though it was not always known by that name. According to Robert Tallant's somewhat sensationalized history of New Orleans voodoo, quote, as early as 1782, Governor Galvez of Louisiana prohibited the importation of Negroes from Martinique because he believed them to be steeped in voodooism. A decade later, Negroes from Santo Domingo were likewise banned, end quotes. New Orleans has been a melting pot for people from different continents for many years: Native American, French, Spanish, English, Cajun, and African, which is to say that it has been a site of Creolization for a long time from these cultures. The confluence of these different cultural and ethnic flows has created a distinctive culture that is unique to New Orleans. Likewise, New Orleans Voodoo represents an expression of Afro-Diasporic religion, which, while it shares many elements with other such expressions, is itself unique to the Crescent City. The pantheon of Loa, same meaning as Orisha, includes local variations such as Joe Ferrai, a form of Ogun Ferrai, and famous New Orleans figures like Dr. John and Marie Laveau. Dr. John, not to be confused with Mac Rebennack, the musician who uses the same stage name, was a famous 19th century voodoo healer and drummer. Marie Laveau, 1794 to 1881, was an even more famous practitioner and healer, as well as her daughter, Marie Laveau II, 1827 to about 1895. Voodoo practices in New Orleans have long included elements of hoodoo, or African American folk magic, and in recent years have been influenced by contemporary New Age ideas and practices as well as Western occultism. Like New Orleans style voodoo, the New Orleans Voodoo Taro represents the convergence of a number of spiritual systems. This reflects a conscious decision on the part of its authors, themselves steeped in a variety of religious and magical backgrounds, to create a tool that would reflect, quote, voodoo's multiracial nature and the special characteristics of the Loa, unquote, by merging a specifically New Orleanian perspective on voodoo with the Taro. As Sally-Ann told me, each Loa was ritually invoked and asked how he or she wished to be represented in the deck, and the deck itself was constructed so as to combine this voodoo sensibility with contemporary Western esoteric teachings on Taro and Kabbalah. Kabbalah, as you may know, is a Western term indicating received knowledge or wisdom, often referring to the oral transmission of the Torah from Moses, who received it on Mount Sinai, to the elders of the early Israelite state through a succession of priests. According to author Joseph Dan, the reception of the Word of God included the Tanakh, or scripture, the Halakha, or laws, and the Midrash, or exegesis. To these was added another element in the Middle Ages, quote, groups of Jewish esoterics and mystics, mainly in Spain, Provence, and later Italy, claimed to be in possession of a secret tradition concerning the meaning of the scriptures and other ancient texts, expounding them as relating to dynamic processes from within the divine realms, unquote. These men were, as Malo Duquette puts it, passionately absorbed in a quest to discover or uncover the Word of God, which they believed to be hidden within the esoteric texts of the Torah. The understanding of these seekers was based upon texts that purported to reveal the methods by which the God of creation had encoded the secrets of creation within the scriptures. Indeed, they went so far as to claim that since the Torah said that God created by the power of the Word, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, the power of creation is in the letters of the alphabet themselves. And they devised tables of these correspondences to show the connections between the letters and their shapes, the numbers and meanings, and they spent years poring over scripture for hidden significance. This science of letter and number, known as gematria, is one of the pillars of Kabbalah and relies upon the fact that Hebrew uses the same characters to indicate both letters and numerals. Since each word can be read as a number, hidden meanings were purported to be revealed by comparing words and phrases that add up to the same number. I'm only aware of 4 alphabets that share this characteristic: Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. All of these are etymologically linked, by the way. For example, the words for lion, Aryeh, and courage, Gebura, both add up to 216. So when one of these words is encountered in the Torah, the Kabbalists claimed, the other could be substituted in order to gain additional insight into the Creator's divine will. In addition to the method of exegesis through gematria, the medieval Kabbalists devised a graphical system of categorization, I can talk really, intended to show the principal powers or emanations of God, which has come to be known as the Otz Chaim, or Tree of Life. It arranges these in a graphical representation comprised of 10 sephirot, or vessels, also known as spheres, along with the 22 paths connecting them. As there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the letters were then assigned to the paths. A third major concept developed by the medieval Kabbalists was based on the gematria of the Shema, or the fourfold name of God, often referred to by Greek texts as the tetragrammaton, or four-letter word, Yod He Vav He. As the Creator's name, it was seen as imbued with divine properties and was analyzed and applied in a number of ways to the rest of the system. Creation was seen as composed of four worlds: the archetypal, the creative, the formative, and the active. And the Tree of Life was thus divided into four zones, and other quadruplicities, the four elements, the cardinal directions, and so on, were mapped onto the four letters of the name. Now bear in mind that these are all still considered on this plane of spirit. The material or physical world is pendant to these. So 19th century interest in the occult saw the rise of a number of mystical fraternities, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1887. Members of the Golden Dawn included Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers, Arthur Edward Waite, William Butler Yeats, children's author E. Nesbit, non-children's author Bram Stoker, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Edward Alexander Aleister Crowley, among others. Through the work of translators like Mathers and Waite and others, concepts from classical Kabbalah were discovered by the late 19th century occultists of the Golden Dawn and incorporated into their attempts to forge a unified theoretical foundation for magic. Aligning the 22 major trumps with the 22 Hebrew letters and the 22 paths on the Tree of Life, and assigning astrological correspondences to these, they merged Kabbalah, Taro, astrology, and other forms of magic. To this synthesis, they added a theory of the structure of the universe, informed by a mixture of proto-enlightenment science, I guess you could call it, maybe post-enlightenment science, and notions of spiritual realms taken from theosophy and spiritualism. As Crowley wrote, "We place no reliance on virgin or pigeon. Our method is science. Our aim is religion." In the eyes of the Golden Dawn members, an Einsteinian grand unified theory of the world rested upon a creolization, there's that word again, of both magical and scientific explanations. Although Kardecisim was not a direct contribution to this synthesis, Kardec's influence may be traced through his impact upon the spiritualists and Orientalist mystics of the generation just prior to the founding of the Golden Dawn. The theories of man's dual nature being comprised of a corporeal and etheric body, in turn, shaped the worldviews of people like Mathers and Crowley. The synthetic and syncretic approach that Crowley learned during his tenure as a member of the Golden Dawn was in turn brought to bear upon his own magical orders, the AA and OTO. He added Kundalini Yoga, the I Ching, alchemy, and other systems to the mix. In fact, Crowley's table of correspondences runs to some 194 columns and relates the Tree of Life not only to astrology and the Taro, but also to lists such as incenses, parts of the human body, Egyptian gods, levels of hell in Arabic mythology, and so on. In particular, his own Taro book and deck were to greatly influence 20th century esotericism, including the authors of the New Orleans Voodoo Taro. Glassman, for example, is a former high-ranking officer in OTO who left the order in the 90s to concentrate upon her Vodou work. As a look at the structure of the New Orleans Voodoo Taro shows, the deck is intended to bring together 20th century synthesis of Kabbalah and Taro with the author's understanding of some of the principal Vodou and Santería spirits. By bringing these two cultural flows together, the New Orleans Voodoo Taro seeks to create a new form of religious understanding, while educating the average Taro user in the richness of Afro-Diasporic religion as practiced in New Orleans, and provide a tool for working with a new synthetic, or let's say creolized, expression of it. African and Afro-Diasporic religion is no stranger to the use of oracles, and Vodou practitioners have been using the Lenormand deck and even regular playing cards for many years. But the use of modern Taro cards is, as far as I can tell, a relatively new occurrence. Unlike the Taro of the Orishas, which includes only a few Orishas, the New Orleans Voodoo Taro fills most of the deck with Loa and Orisha. The cards not associated with African-derived spirits reflect the New Orleans-flavored expression of Voodoo, including concepts like running of the Mardi Gras and Carnival. The 40 cards of the Lesser Arcana reflect Martini and Glassman's synthesis of Western occultism and Voodoo, relating the elements to both the Kabbalistic letters in the name of God and to the nation, or nations, of Voodoo spirits. The numbers of the cards in each case, let's go back. The numbers of the cards in each suit are linked to the spheres on the Tree of Life, and the Loa and Orisha are specifically assigned to those sephirot based upon their characteristic natures. The court cards are aligned with the principal officers of the Umfo, or Voodoo temple, as well. The Hungan, or male priest, to the kings. The Mambo, or female high priestess, to the queens. The Laplace, or male chief assistant, to the knights. And the Hunsi, or female assistant and usually Mambo in training, to the pages. The authors have also included concepts from Santería or Lucumí, which they associate with the element of earth. And so the court cards here also reflect the temple hierarchy, listing the Santero, Santera, Oriate, and Yaguo, or Iawo. There's also one wild card not found in any traditional Taro, the Barons, or Les Barons. The listings for each card describe the spirit or principle embodied, discuss the image on the card, and explain the significance of its details, providing both a contemplation, or a brief image for meditation, and a divinatory reading for the card. For example, quoting the reading for Obeah, third card of the earth element. Whirling cloth tears through worlds. Obeah, wild dancer on death's thin edge. The ancestors rise to your call as the jangling beat of bata drums guides your feet. Within you, the womb and the tomb are held in perfect balance. Mistress of the marketplace where all paths meet. Mistress of the earth's deep searing pressures. Mistress of the sky's hot fire. Sky's whirlwind tearing into earth. Mother of storms. All hurricanes in final reckoning bear your name. In New Orleans, hurricane season is the time of Obeah. All of these storms are named for her sons and daughters. The power of Obeah, celebrated in these cards, is the elemental might of earth acting through Binah. She shares the earth's power, compacted and ever erupting under tremendous pressure. Her name itself is associated with tearing. Among the Yoruba, it is she who owns the torn cloth used in the ancestral masquerades of the Egungun ceremony. Her aspect in this card is that of a woman dancing while covered with the torn cloth. She holds lightning to illustrate one of her manifestations, Mother of Storms. She dances atop a tomb covered with gourds of eggplant, which is sacred to her. Lightning strikes a tree within the graveyard. It falls and becomes covered with far-reaching growth of eggplant. An abrupt change is in situation. Gain in the marketplace. Turns for the better. in the matters of business. Like the Taro of the Orishas, the New Orleans Voodoo Taro describes and explains the cards, offers ways to interpret them in a Taro layout, and discusses their various associations. In addition, Martini and Glassman provide chapters on Voodoo and Western esoteric tradition, discuss topics such as possession, sacrifice, and ritual. In including these latter topics in a book about a Taro deck whose framework is decidedly non-African, the authors are able to teach readers who are not themselves practitioners some fundamental concepts that are key to Afro-Diasporic religions. So, some conclusions. In both of these text cases, we find elements of African and European-derived esoteric beliefs blended together. Each of these disparate cultural flows underwent years of creolization in the local environments in which they evolved, and a further level of creolization was then applied as they came together. That is, Afro-diasporic religions underwent years of creolization in the New World, while at the same time Western esotericism has undergone likewise its own evolving creolization with science, philosophy, Middle Eastern and Asian influences, and so on. In recent years, these two cultural flows came together into new forms explored here today. The result in each case is a previously unknown cultural artifact. Reflecting upon the definition of creolization as the creating of an entirely new form that employs the grammatical structures of one with the vocabulary of the other, we see that this closely describes each of our examples. The Taro of the Orishas presents a novel approach to Afro-diasporic religions, uniting a European-derived framework with ideas and beliefs from both Western esotericism and Brazilian religious forms such as Candomblé, Batuque, and Umbanda. By bringing together these varied spiritual expressions, occultism, Taro, New Age ideas, Spiritism from Europe, the Orisha from Africa, and Afro-Brazilian religions, influences from Brazilian culture, Zolrak is able to provide a tool that retains most of its Western framework with a flavor that is distinctly Afro-Brazilian. At the same time, the Taro of the Orishas offers a way for those more familiar with the Taro than with Orisha to learn more about Afro-Brazilian spirituality. In the New Orleans Voodoo Taro, creators Martini and Glassman have devised a new tool that brings together the framework of one cultural and spiritual background, i.e. the use of Taro and Kabbalah, with concepts from another, namely New Orleans-style voodoo. They have taken elements from European occultism, including ideas about Taro, Kabbalah, and ceremonial magic, and blended them with ideas and practices from Afro-diasporic religion as it is conceived and practiced in contemporary New Orleans. In doing so, they have created something new, a tool that serves to teach non-voodooists something about New Orleans Voodoo, and at the same time may be used by practitioners of voodoo as a practical resource for guidance, meditation, and invocation. As we have seen, a creolized language is one in which systems of a dominant culture and the lexicon of a subordinate culture fuse to create a third cultural expression. Exploring in any great detail the question of privilege and cultural imperialism raised by such a discourse is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I would be remiss if I did not bring the question at least to your attention. Both Lou Martini and Sally Ann Glassman are white adopters of voodoo, and thus come to Afro-diasporic religions from a position of privilege. Glassman especially so as a white American going to a shantytown area of Haiti for initiation. Neither one is a native New Orleanian. On the other hand, their involvement in voodoo has not gone unchallenged. Glassman, for example, has had to face discrimination, with some in the voodoo community asking whether a white Jewish woman can ever really be a mambo or priestess. Nevertheless, there is some room to raise questions of privilege here. One wonders whether a poor black practitioner of New Orleans Voodoo, or still less, one from Haiti, would have been able to gain a publishing contract for a project like this. Please note, I want to be very clear that I am not accusing Glassman of cultural appropriation. I personally know her to be absolutely sincere and completely dedicated to Vodou, the Loa, and the community that she tirelessly serves, often at great personal cost. As Lon Duquette said, be prepared to pay for everything. In the case of the Taro of the Orishas, it's difficult to say what Zolrak's background is. Although the author's biographical note claims experience with Umbanda and Candomblé, he appears to be Argentine, not Brazilian, which might explain why he writes in Spanish and not Portuguese. And by the way, I note with some amusement that Zolrak is more or less Carlos reversed. He is said to be a priest of Batuque and of Candomblé, who later became a Babalorisha, or father of the spirits, the Umbanda equivalent of a Hungan, or priest. And the book further notes that he was educated at the Argentine University of Enterprise, a private university in Buenos Aires. The book's preface is written by one Dr. Cosentino, who is identified as a, quote, general practitioner, sexologist, cellular therapist, and gynecologist. And he addresses the book's author as Professor Zolrak. Clearly, Zolrak is not of the poor and educated class, which in Brazil, where Zolrak presumably would have studied Umbanda and or Candomblé, is predominantly black. But beyond that, it's hard to say. While Brazilian society has been highly stratified in a number of ways and continues to be so today, in the contemporary period, Umbanda and Candomblé practitioners come from all levels of society. Under these circumstances, it's difficult to determine to what extent privilege has played a part in the creation of the Taro of the Orishas. So, in closing, let me note some general conclusions from our discussion tonight about creolization. First, Afro-Diasporic religions have been a particularly fruitful ground for ongoing creolization of cultures. This would seem to spring from the nature of the diasporic experience itself, with the tensions inherent in struggling to hold on to one's cultural background in an environment characterized by slavery, colonization, and forced merging with peoples of other cultures and religious expressions, and so on. In such a milieu, the construction of personal and group identities must rely upon a more fluid sense of who we are than in a more homogeneous society where change comes more slowly. Second, the process of creolization that began under slavery has not stopped. On the contrary, it has continued to be an ongoing process even through the present day, whether reflected in the creation of a Brazilian Sons of Gandhi organization or the fusion of Western occultism with Afro-Brazilian religions and with New Orleans Voodoo that produced the cultural artifacts in this study. Creolization is clearly a continuing force in Afro-diasporic cultures at large. Finally, the linguistic metaphor has been particularly apt in attempting to model the processes of creolization witnessed in our test cases. The synthesis of ideas from two or more cultures into a new expression not previously encountered, like the production of a creolized language from the meeting of disparate ethnicities, appears to follow more or less a similar pattern. The power dynamics of such processes, vis-a-vis dominant and subaltern cultures, also appear to be amenable to further exploration in this regard. However, it's important to note that these flows have not been all in one direction. Rather, the creolization that we find in the evolution of Afro-diasporic religions in the Americas is one that now evidences ongoing cultural flows between cultures in both the dominant and the subaltern in both directions. And we have seen an example of the Brazilian form of some Orisha appearing in Yoruban forms of religion as well. So that was a whole lot of talking. Questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions or comments.
Yeah. Oh. I'm not sure if you can see my name.
I can, but I can't read it.
Okay. Brian McHugh here from Telesis.
93.
93. A couple of comments, and I'd like to make just to add to your list of writing systems that have numerical associations. It's not a major omission because it's just a derivative of the Greek alphabet, namely the Cyrillic alphabet.
Good point.
The same system with some of its own variations.
So do they use letters as numbers as well, or do they have? Do they use the Arabic?
No, they do not do that. But
okay.
They do have the they did preserve the numerological associations. And I'm trying to think what use that was put to in among the speakers of Slavic who used the alphabet. I'll look that up, but definitely there are attributions that are documented.
That's a very good point, and I had kind of glanced over, skimmed over the fact that in fact Cyrillic comes from the Greek. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, there's another little angle on that, but that's more tangential, so I'll take that up with you later.
Okay.
I would like to, I wanted to interrupt way back at the beginning, but out of respect for your very, very well prepared presentation and very insightful and very well researched presentation. As a linguist, I was really surprised by that quote. I saw that it was attributed to Fromkin et al. 2007. Is that
the one on definition?
Yeah, the definition of creolization.
Okay.
I think that's an introductory linguistics textbook, perhaps.
Probably, yeah. Is that superseded?
Well, no. Did you get that directly from that source, or did you get it through an intermediary?
I don't remember right this moment. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I'm not. Check where you got it from, because it looks to me like something was transposed.
Oh. Okay.
And this is.
So really, should it be the other way around?
Yes.
Okay, that's probably me.
Okay, yeah. Then yeah. And so I was like, oh my God, this is going to completely turn everything upside down, but it doesn't really.
I'm grabbing a pen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to set the record straight too.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I think you'll still be able to work with that just fine. What typically happens in the evolution of a Creole is that it's the superstrate, or the culturally or economically dominant language that donates the bulk of the vocabulary, the lexicon.
You're right. Now that I think about it, because I'm thinking like about pidgin.
Yeah, right.
For example.
Or Haitian Creole or Jamaican patois. These all have recognizably English or French or Portuguese vocabulary, and what's different is the grammar, which sounds to speakers of the lexical donor languages like baby talk or gibberish, but in fact is its own grammar, which. And so this is where it's not completely backwards. The grammar that emerges is kind of half
just a hybrid.
It's a hybrid. Well, no, it's a hybrid of what we believe, what many linguists believe to be universal grammar tendencies, with a heavy substrate influence, a heavy influence of any aerial features that were common among the substrate languages, because in many cases we have languages that came from the same part of the world, say, West Africa, a number of West African languages. So there are some features we see in Caribbean Creoles that, like what are known as serial verb constructions, which are common in a number of languages of West Africa. Or in some of the perhaps the talk piecing in Papua New Guinea,
right?
Or the pidgins of Southeast Asia, there might be family resemblances among those languages that find their way. There are, in fact, yeah. One example would be numeral classifiers, which you see in many East Asian languages. So so it's kind of a mix of sort of the default settings for grammar that we think children kind of attribute to the data that they're exposed to when they acquire language in the absence of a real well-defined adult grammatical system, which is what happens when a Creole evolves from a pidgin. Pidgin being the technical term we use for the precursor to a Creole,
right,
which is sort of the compromise communication that adult speakers who don't share a language kind of use in trying to make themselves understood.
This is excellent. It would.
Yeah. Can
I ask you to send me more or less what you just said?
Okay, yeah, I'll try and sure. Can I? This is being recorded too, right? So I can maybe if I can't reconstruct exactly what I said, I can send you sources from the materials I use.
Yeah, no, just that encapsulation would be really useful.
Yeah.
That would be great, and I'll have my email up on here shortly.
Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, no, thank you very much.
So yeah, but I think if you think about that, that's going to work very well. And again, there are still grammatical influences from the superstrate that creep in through contact with the superstrate over time. And but I think the lexicon would be sort of the symbol set that's very much African, and a European sort of. I'm sorry, I'm getting it backwards too, but no. So the idea of, say, associating Azuli Danto with the
Black Virgin, yeah,
is would fit that nicely, because it's basically the lexical content of the European language with the practices and the rituals and the beliefs associated with the
yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I had a question too.
Yeah, right. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I'm Starlet from Kansu Camp in Las Vegas. And I actually, my husband is Santero. I'm also an initiate into Santería. And my question was really about what source you have as to the Orishas not being synchronized or syncretized with the Catholic saints as a means of confiding.
Right. Good question. And my answer is, well, let me start by clarifying what I am claiming, and it's not my claim, but what I'm saying is not that they're not syncretized. What I'm saying is there's people will say, well, they hid their practices from the masters by trying to camouflage them as, no, we're not doing voodoo, we're not doing our native religion, we're actually just good Catholics. See these candles, see these polychromes, these pictures, pay no attention to the rest of the altar. And that's just, you know, a number of writers, researchers, and practitioners have since said, no, that's not how it worked. It was, in fact, a form of syncretism where they're just using, and I shouldn't say just, but they are using symbol sets like the Taro is another way that we can talk about. It's almost like if we didn't speak the same language, but we had a Taro deck, we could sort of communicate that way.
Yeah, I get where you're going with that, but
okay.
I just am trying to see like what source you have as to that not being a way of concealing their beliefs, because from my own personal experience versus, you know, all of the research that I have done, everything I've found has said that is one aspect to it, that is a way that they did that. Maybe not consistently like across the board, oh, it was always had to be hidden, but that is one aspect that in my research I found was consistent. So that's why I'm trying to. Yeah.
I don't have the sources to hand. I would have to look it up again. So some of it was some textual research, and some of it was talking to, at least on the Vodou side, talking to Hungan and Mambo, plural, from the Vodou side. But I can't quote you chapter and verse right now, I'm afraid. Again, you know, I wrote this as a talk. I didn't write it as a research paper, so.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions, comments, spare change? Yeah, go ahead.
If I could chime in on that, you know, it's a question of whether that was the primary, this camouflage was the primary motivation for that, or whether it was a
kind of a knock-on effect.
Yeah, or a convenient byproduct of it. Is something you could explore. Yeah. Because again, thinking of the linguistic metaphor, you know, they're using these Creoles arose in a situation where the subordinated peoples couldn't use their language among themselves because they had different languages, and yet they are also kind of not given the opportunity to learn the dominant culture's language. But the vocabulary they had to work with came from the vocabulary that the dominant people were using to communicate with them.
And there again, they're using the symbol sets.
Yeah, right. So they're bringing that symbol set, and then, but what they did with it was, you know, based on their own cultural context. So it would serve both purposes in a way.
Yeah. And I would think that the primary benefit, I don't want to, you know, ascribe causality, but the primary benefit would be, you know, if you come from Congo and I come from Benin, and we don't speak each other's language, but we both have an idea of Legba, Elegwa, Elegbara, of this idea of a spirit who is the opener of the ways, then we can communicate, and we can, more importantly, we can do ritual together. We can worship together. So now, again, you know, the texts that I have seen that make this claim might be, you know, they might have their own axe to grind as well. I don't know. So, you know, that's always the problem with historians and such. Yeah, Dave, as far as I know, once it's collated, it'll be it'll be shareable, to answer Dave's question. Any other questions or comments? I don't want to keep you guys all night. Going once, going twice.
No, thank you for sharing. 93.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for your comment. Don't go away, guys. But wait, there's more. Now, how much would you pay? So, other workshops. I'm not going to read them all at you, but I will mention some of these may be doable through the Education Committee if you ask nicely. And some of them, if you're interested in hosting through your own local body feed, or at some point when the world turns right side up again, maybe we can do them in person at your local body. So the ones that are really near and dear to my heart, the suicide prevention, I really encourage everybody to get to experience that. It's not going to certify you, but it will give you some sort of emergency CPR, first aid like skills in case you get called upon to help a brother or sister in need. Another one that I think is important that not enough local bodies are doing is strategic planning at the local level. One that I'm working on, I'm writing now, is ethics. Not the one for ethics, sorry. That one I shamelessly stole from Dionysus. The one that I'm working on right now is called Fundamentals of Leadership. And I would like to present that at various levels of local bodies as well. And there's these other ones. What's a Rose Cross chapter? What's an SGID? What are they good for? Absolutely nothing. Huh? Say it again. An EGC series that's probably better in person. I can do them online, but they're probably better in person. Magic and religion. I'm getting ready to do the Amduat one through Scarlet Woman upcoming, so check their calendar. You're seeing the Orishas one. I've done a bunch of Enochian ones, and I love going to local bodies and doing the full 2-day version. 1 week can do that. Some other ones, just my own personal hobby horse. I love talking about. So my master's degree was actually on that first subject, on religion and the supernatural and contemporary Japanese pop culture, aka anime and manga and computer games. And so, yes, you can BS your way to an MA. And I like talking about why in such a secularized society as Japan are these themes of religion and magic and the supernatural and shape-shifting creatures and all of this stuff so important, so dominant. And why are some religions depicted positively and some depicted negatively and some not really depicted at all? And then all of this stuff from when I was a history professor, if you're interested in any of this stuff. You've already got about half of my Afro-Diasporic religions one right tonight, but there's other stuff. The ones that I'm really big on are the history of civil rights in America and the history of conflict in the Middle East. They don't really fit in an OTO context unless you have people at your local body who are interested in those topics, because they're not really talking about magic or ceremonialism or thelema per se. And here is my contact information. So please feel free to contact me with questions, comments, criticism, spare change, lingerie, whatever it might be. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. And with that, I thank you very much. That's all, folks. Now if I can find the button. There we go.
Thank you.
There you are. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Wherever. It would have been really boring if it was just me.